In the winter of 1887, in the high plains north of Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, the snow came without mercy. It started in late November as a soft fall that blanketed the grass and filled the coulees, but by January, the wind turned vicious driving flakes sideways like needles. The temperature dropped until breath froze on lips, and the cattle already weakened from a dry summer began to die where they stood. Men called it the Great Die-Up, though few spoke the name aloud. The land itself seemed to have decided against mercy. Along a narrow wagon trace, branching off the main trail toward the Powder River, a boy no more than 10 trudged forward, one small hand clenched around the wrist of his sister, who was perhaps 6. The boy's name was Elias, though no one had called him that since their mother's cough turned wet and final 3 months earlier. Their father had followed the fever road soon after leaving the two of them in the soddy with nothing but a half-sack of cornmeal and the wind rattling the door like an impatient debtor. They had eaten the last of the meal 2 days ago. Now the boy carried a thin wool blanket wrapped around the girl's shoulders, and she clutched a rag doll whose stitching had come undone along one arm. The snow reached Elias's knees in places. Each step pulled at his legs like wet clay. The girl whose name was Clara stumbled often. When she fell, he lifted her without a word, set her on her feet again, and kept moving. Her face had gone the color of old ash lips, cracked and bloodless. Elias kept his eyes on the horizon, searching for smoke or the dark shape of a cabin, but the world had shrunk to white and wind. He whispered to her sometimes promises he did not know if he could keep. "We'll find a fire soon."
Someone's got to have a fire.
He did not cry. Tears would have frozen anyway. Miles away on a rise where the wind cut sharpest, a man named Jonah Calder sat his horse and watched the plain below. He was 34, lean from too many hard winters, his beard frosted white at the edges, though his hair stayed dark. He had ridden out from his line shack to check on a few head of cattle he still hoped to save, but the drifts had swallowed most sign. Jonah carried a rifle across his saddle and a coil of rope, though neither felt useful against what the sky had become. He had lost his wife to childbed fever 4 winters back and the baby with her. Since then he had lived alone, speaking more to horses than men. The solitude suited him, or so he told himself. Through the swirling white, he caught movement, a small, dark shape against the endless pale. At first he thought it a calf strayed far, but the shape split into two, one taller pulling the other. Jonah narrowed his eyes. Children. Out here. Alone. He urged the horse down the slope, the animal lunging through the drifts. When he drew close, he saw the boy turn, shielding the girl, with his body eyes wide and wary beneath the brim of a too large hat. The boy did not run. He stood his ground, small fists balled at his sides. Jonah reined up a few yards away. The wind tore at his words. "You lost," Elias stared up at him. Snow clung to his lashes. "Ain't lost. Just walkin' where to anywhere there's heat." Jonah looked at the girl. She swayed, eyes half closed. He swung down from the saddle boots, sinking deep, and knelt so his face was level with the boy's. "She ain't gonna make much farther." Elias swallowed. "I know." Jonah studied them both, the thin coats patched with flour sacks, the girl's bare hands blue at the fingertips. Something moved in his chest, old and reluctant, like ice cracking on a still pond. He had not intended to take on burdens again. Yet here they were. "Come on," he said quietly. "My place is 3 miles east. Got a stove and coffee. Beans, if you're hungry." Elias hesitated, glancing at Clara. She had not spoken in hours. Finally, he nodded once sharp. Jonah lifted the girl, first settling her in front of him on the saddle. She weighed almost nothing. Then he reached for Elias. The boy climbed up behind, arms tight around Jonah's waist, as if afraid the horse might vanish beneath them. They rode in silence, the storm raging around them. Jonah felt the boy's cheek press against his back, the small tremors of cold or fear or both. Clara leaned into Jonah's coat, her breathing shallow. He kept the horse to a steady walk, breaking trail where he could. By the time they reached the line, Shack, the light had gone gray and flat. The cabin was small logs, chinked with mud, a single window covered in greased paper, a lean-to for the horse. Inside the stove still held embers for morning. Jonah carried Clara to the bunk, wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Elias stood by the door, dripping snow, watching everything with careful eyes. Jonah built up the fire. The heat came slow but sure. He set a pot of beans to warm sliced cornbread from a day-old loaf. When the food was ready, he handed Elias a tin plate. The boy ate slowly at first, then faster, scraping the plate clean. Clara managed a few spoonfuls before her eyes closed again. Jonah sat on a stool, coffee in hand, and watched them. The boy looked up once met his gaze. "You gonna send us on come mornin'?" Elias asked. Jonah considered the question. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the door. Storm's got more to say yet. "We'll see." Elias nodded, as if that were answer enough. That night, Jonah lay on the floorboards listening to the children breathe. Clara's fever broke toward dawn. She murmured once in her sleep, a small sound like a question. Elias slept, curled beside her, one arm across her waist, still guarding even in dreams. Jonah stared at the ceiling timbers. He had come to this country to forget things lost, promises broken, a life that had slipped through his fingers like sand. Now 2 children had walked out of the white and into his keeping. He did not know what it meant, only that the cabin felt less empty. In the morning, the snow had eased to a steady fall. Jonah stepped outside to tend the horse and found Elias already there, sweeping the stoop with a broken broom face set in determination. "You don't have to do that," Jonah said. "Habit," the boy replied. "Pa always said, idle hands make trouble." Jonah watched him work a moment. "Your pay teach you much else some. How to read tracks, how to split wood straight, how to keep Clara safe." The last words came quieter. Jonah nodded. "You did right by her yesterday." Elias shrugged, but his shoulders eased a fraction. Inside, Clara sat up in the bunk, cheeks pinker now. She looked at Jonah with solemn eyes. "You got a name, Jonah Calder?" "I'm Clara." "That's Elias. He's my brother." "I figured." She smiled, then small and sudden, like sun breaking through cloud. Jonah felt something shift inside him, quiet but real. "Tell us what story you want next on the Wild West Spirit." The days stretched into a fragile routine. The storm held for another 3 full days, sealing them inside the small cabin like seeds under frost. Jonah rose before first light, fed the stove-boiled coffee so strong it could stand a spoon in. Elias was always up soon after, folding blankets with precise movements, sweeping the floor even when there was little to sweep. Clara stayed in the bunk longer, but each morning she sat up, stronger cheeks filling out, eyes brighter. Jonah taught them what he knew without making it seem like lessons. He showed Elias how to split kindling so it caught quick, how to read the wind's direction by the way smoke left the chimney. The boy listened hard, asked few questions, but his hands remembered. When Jonah handed him the axe, Elias swung it with both arms, chips flying clean. Jonah said nothing about the boy's thin wrists or the way he paused to catch his breath. He only nodded once when the pile was stacked neat. Clara followed Jonah like a shadow. She carried the small tin cup he gave her, filled it with snow from the doorstep, watched him melt it on the stove. "For washin'," she explained solemnly when he raised an eyebrow. "Mama said clean hands keep sickness away." Jonah felt the old ache rise in his throat, but swallowed it down. He let her help knead the biscuit dough, her small fingers leaving prints in the flour. When the biscuits came out golden, she clapped once, soft and surprised, as if the oven had performed a private miracle. Evenings were quiet. They ate together at the rough plank table, beans, cornbread, sometimes a strip of jerked venison Jonah had saved back. Afterward, Clara would climb into the bunk, and Elias would sit beside her until she slept. Jonah stayed by the stove mending harness or cleaning the rifle, but his eyes kept drifting to the children. The cabin had always been silent. Now the silence felt different, filled with small sounds. Clara's breathing, Elias turning a page in the one-worn book. Jonah owned an almanac with yellowed corners, the crack of the fire settling. One night the wind dropped enough that stars showed through the paper window. Jonah stepped outside to check the horse and found Elias already there, staring at the sky. The boy's breath rose in white plumes. Pa said, "Stars are holes in heaven's floor," Elias said without turning. Said Mama's up there looking down. Jonah stood beside him, hands in his coat pockets. Your pa talk about heaven much, only after she died. Before that, he mostly talked about land. Good grass. Water that don't freeze. Elias's voice cracked on the last word. He wiped his nose on his sleeve. He left us the day after the funeral. Said he'd be back with supplies. Never came. Jonah let the silence sit between them. The cold burned his cheeks. I ain't mad, Elias added quickly. Just tired of waiting. Jonah looked at the boy's profile, sharp cheekbones, stubborn jaw, already hinting at the man he would become. Waiting's a hard thing, he said. Doesn't always mean the thing's comin', Elias nodded slow. You ever wait for somebody? Jonah thought of his wife's grave on a rise above the ranch house he'd sold 2 years back. Thought of the baby who never drew breath. Yeah, he said. I waited. Then I stopped. They stood there until the cold drove them inside. The next morning, the sky cleared to a hard, pale blue. Jonah saddled the horse and rode out to check fences. When he returned, Elias had shoveled a path to the lean-to, and Clara was hanging their washed stockings on a line Jonah had strung between 2 posts. The sight stopped him in the doorway. Stockings small and patched, swaying in the wind like flags of survival. That afternoon, he took them both outside. The snow had crusted. They walked on top in places. Jonah showed Elias how to set snares for rabbits. The boy watched every knot, every placement. Clara gathered dry twigs for kindling, humming a tune Jonah didn't recognize. When a jackrabbit bolted from under a sagebrush, Elias froze, but Jonah's hand on his shoulder steadied him. Easy, Jonah murmured. They're quick, but we're patient. They returned with 1 rabbit thin, but enough for supper. Elias skinned it with careful strokes while Jonah watched, offering no correction. Clara built the fire higher than necessary, cheeks flushed from the cold and pride. That night, after Clara slept, Elias sat across from Jonah at the table. The lamp threw long shadows. You got family somewhere? The boy asked. Jonah turned his coffee cup in his hands. Had lost 'em, like us. Not exactly. Jonah met the boy's eyes. My wife died birthing the child too. After that, I drifted. Sold the place. Came here to be alone. Elias studied him. You ain't alone now. Jonah gave a small, wry smile. No, I ain't. The boy looked down at his hands. We could stay. If you'd let us. I can work. Clara too, soon as she's bigger. We won't be trouble. Jonah felt the words settle heavy in his chest. He had spent years building walls against exactly this, against needing, against losing again. Yet here sat a boy asking for nothing more than a place to stand. I'll think on it, Jonah said finally. Elias nodded, accepting. He rose, checked on Clara, then lay down beside her without another word. Jonah stayed up long after feeding the stove small pieces of wood, listening to the house settle. Outside, a coyote yipped once, sharp and lonely. He thought of the empty years behind him, the empty years he had expected ahead. Then he thought of Elias sweeping the stoop, Clara's small hands in the dough, the way the cabin smelled now of bread and wood smoke and children. He did not sleep much that night. By week's end, the thaw began. Snow slid from the roof in wet clumps. Water dripped from the eaves. Jonah knew the pass would open soon. Supply wagons would move again. Choices would have to be made. He found Elias outside splitting kindling with steady rhythm. The boy paused when Jonah approached. Town send in a rider through tomorrow, Jonah said. could take word to the county seat. They got an orphanage in Laramie. Or families looking for help. Elias set the axe down. His face went still. You want us to go? Jonah looked at the boy, really looked. Saw the fear behind the steady gaze, the hope he tried not to show. I want you to tell me what you want, Jonah said. Elias swallowed. I want to stay. With you. If you'll have us. Jonah felt the crack widen inside him, the old ice giving way. He reached out, rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. Then we'll see about making it legal. Papers and such. But you stay as long as you want. Both of you. Elias blinked fast. He did not cry, but his mouth trembled. Clara'll like that. She already calls you Jonah like your kin. Jonah smiled small and real. Reckon she can keep doing that. They stood there in the wet snow, the sun weak but warm on their faces. Somewhere a meadowlark called first song of the new season. The thaw came in earnest, turning the yard to mud that sucked at boots and hooves alike. Jonah hitched the wagon he kept under the lean to loaded it with the last of his winter store sacks of oats for the horse, a few jars of preserves he had traded for in Cheyenne the previous fall. He told the children they were going into town. Not to send them away, he said quickly, when Elias's face tightened. To buy seed nails, cloth for new clothes, and to speak with the county clerk about guardianship papers. The ride took most of the day. The trail was rutted and slick. The wagon wheels slipped and caught. Clara sat between them on the spring seat, wrapped in a quilt Jonah had cut down from an old one his wife had pieced. Elias held the lines when Jonah let his small hands steady, despite the tremble in his arms from the effort. The boy asked about the town, how many people, if there was a school, if the store sold peppermint sticks. Jonah answered what he could. He had not been to town since before Christmas. The answers felt rusty in his mouth. Cheyenne sprawled at the edge of the plains, smoke rising from chimneys, the depot bell clanging as a freight train labored west. The streets were alive with men in heavy coats, women in shawls, children darting between wagons. Jonah tied the horse outside the mercantile and lifted Clara down. She clung to his hand, eyes wide at the noise and color. Elias walked close beside them, had pulled low scanning faces as if expecting trouble. Inside the store, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, tobacco, new leather. The clerk, a thin man named Harlan, with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Jonah by name, surprised, almost wary. Jonah had not been sociable in years. They bought flour sugar, a bolt of blue calico for Clara wool, for shirts. When Harlan totaled the amount Jonah paid with coins, he had kept back the last of what he had saved from selling pelts. At the courthouse, the clerk was younger, brisk-smelling faintly of ink. He listened to Jonah's story without much expression. 2 orphans found in the storm, no kin known willing to take them in permanent. The man asked questions, names, ages, how long the children had been alone. Elias answered when Jonah looked to him, voice clear though quiet. Clara stayed silent, fingers twisting in Jonah's coat hem. The clerk wrote for a long time. When he finished, he slid papers across the desk. Sign here and here. You'll need 2 witnesses. Can find them easy enough in town. Jonah signed his name in careful block letters. Elias watched, then reached for the pen when the clerk offered it. The boy's signature was small but firm, Elias James Harrow. Clara made an X beside her name tongue between her teeth in concentration. The clerk witnessed it himself and stamped the page. That's done. File it with the judge next circuit, but it holds till then. Outside, Jonah felt the weight of the papers in his pocket like a stone warmed by sun. Not ownership, never that, but something closer to promise. They stopped at the confectioner's before leaving town. Jonah bought 3 peppermint sticks. Clara's eyes lit when he handed her one. Elias broke his in half and gave the larger piece to his sister without being asked. Jonah kept his own in his pocket, saving it. The ride home was quieter. The sun dropped low, painting the snowfields gold and rose. Clara fell asleep against Jonah's side, peppermint still clutched in her fist. Elias watched the horizon a long time before speaking. You didn't have to do that, he said. The papers. Wanted to, Jonah answered. Elias nodded once. Pa never did papers for anything. Said a man's word was enough? Sometimes it is. Sometimes the law likes ink better. The boy considered that. You're keeping us for good. Jonah glanced down at him. If that's what you want. Elias looked away toward the fading light. It is. That night, back in the cabin, Jonah built the fire high. Clara tried on the new calico too big yet, but she twirled in it anyway, skirt flaring like a bell. Elias helped Jonah unload the wagon, stacking sacks in the corner with careful pride. When everything was put away, Jonah sat at the table and spread the guardianship papers out. He read them aloud slow, so the children could hear the words that made it real. Clara climbed into his lap when he finished. Does this mean you're our pa now? Jonah felt the question settle deep. He looked at Elias, who waited with steady eyes. Means I'm responsible for you, Jonah said. Means you got a home here, long as you want it. The rest, we figure as we go. Clara nodded, satisfied. She laid her head against his chest, and soon her breathing evened into sleep. Elias stayed awake longer. He sat across the table, tracing the grain of the wood with one finger. I dreamed about Pa coming back, he said quietly. Almost every night. Then I stopped dreaming it. Hurt too much. Jonah waited. Now I'm scared to dream something else might go away. Jonah reached across, covered the boy's hand with his own. The gesture felt strange after so long without touch, but right. I ain't going anywhere, he said. And I ain't perfect. But I'll stay. Elias turned his hand over palm up and let Jonah's rest there a moment. Then he pulled back, not abrupt, just finished. Reckon that's enough, he said. Spring pushed hard after that. Grass greened the flats almost overnight. Jonah and Elias broke ground for a bigger garden: potatoes, carrots, beans. Clara followed with a stick, poking holes for seeds, singing songs she half remembered from her mother. Jonah taught Elias to ride the horse bareback, to read brands on stray cattle that wandered close. The boy learned fast, asked questions sharper each day. One evening in late April, Jonah found Elias sitting on the rise behind the cabin, knees drawn up, staring at the place where the trail disappeared into the distance. Jonah walked up slow, sat beside him without speaking. Thinking about running? Jonah asked after a while. Elias shook his head. Thinking about staying feels strange. Good strange. Jonah looked out over the land, the new green, the cattle grazing farther each day, the cabin below with smoke rising steady from the chimney. Clara's voice carried up faint, calling the chickens home. Strange can settle, Jonah said. Give it time. Elias leaned against him just enough that their shoulders touched. Jonah did not move away. That summer they built a small porch onto the cabin. Jonah sawed logs, Elias planed them smooth. Clara carried nails in her apron pocket, proud to be useful. When the porch was finished, they sat there the first evening, 3 of them in a row, watching the sun drop behind the mountains. Clara's head rested on Jonah's arm. Elias's boot tapped a slow rhythm against the boards. Jonah reached into his pocket, pulled out the peppermint stick he had saved since Cheyenne. It had gone sticky in the heat, but still held its red and white spiral. He broke it into 3 pieces. Clara took hers with delight. Elias accepted his without hurry. They sat until the stars came out sharp and close. No one spoke of the past that night. There was no need. The land kept teaching them about seasons, about loss, about what could grow again when the ground thawed. And in the quiet spaces between work and weather, something took root that had no name yet but felt like family. The summer deepened, days long and hot, the kind of heat that pressed against the skin like a flat hand. The garden Jonah and Elias had broken came in strong potatoes swelling under the earth beans, climbing the poles they had lashed together from willow. Clara spent mornings weeding with fierce concentration, pulling intruders by the roots and laying them in neat rows to dry in the sun. She named the scarecrow they built Mr. Crow, dressing him in an old shirt of Jonah's and a hat with a frayed brim. When the first beans were ready, she picked them herself, carried them inside in her apron like treasure, and insisted on stringing them for supper. Jonah watched the children settle into the rhythm of the place and felt the cabin expand around them. The porch they had built became the heart of evenings. They sat there, after chores, Jonah whittling spoons from cottonwood, Elias practicing knots with a length of rope, Clara braiding grass into tiny figures she called people for the garden. Sometimes she sang small voice, carrying over the grass old hymns her mother had taught, words half forgotten but melody clear. Jonah never joined in, but he listened to sound easing something tight in his chest he had not known was there. One afternoon in July, thunderheads built tall over the mountains, dark and bruise-colored. The air turned thick, metallic. Jonah sent the children inside when the first drops fell fat and heavy. Elias helped shutter the window. Clara gathered the laundry from the lime pins still clenched between her teeth. The storm broke hard wind, tearing at the eaves, rain hammering the roof like buckshot. Lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled so close the ground shook. They sat by the stove lamp lit early against the gloom. Clara pressed close to Jonah's side, eyes wide, but not frightened. Elias stood at the door, peering through a crack, counting seconds between flash and boom. When hail came, stones the size of marbles rattling the tin roof, he shut the door quick and latched it. Pa used to say storms like this clean the world, Elias said over the noise. Said afterward, everything smells new. Jonah nodded. He wasn't wrong. The storm passed as sudden as it arrived. When the rain eased to drizzle, they stepped outside. The world had been washed. Every blade of grass stood sharp in green puddles reflecting sky. Clara ran ahead, splashing through water, laughing when mud sucked at her shoes. Elias followed, slower, kicking stones, but a small smile tugged his mouth. Jonah walked last, breathing deep. The air carried wet sage and earth. He felt the land breathe with them. That night after supper, Clara fell asleep early, exhausted from the day. Jonah and Elias sat on the porch steps, stars thick overhead. The boy had grown taller these months, pants already short at the ankle. Jonah noticed the way Elias's shoulders had broadened from swinging the axe, the way he carried himself straighter. You ever think about school come fall? Jonah asked. Elias looked sideways at him. Thought about it. Clara needs it more. She's quick with letters. And you, I can read some. Write my name. Figure some's enough to know when the store's cheatin', Elias paused. But I don't want to leave here every day. Not yet. Jonah considered that. The nearest school was 12 miles, a one-room place with a teacher who came and went. He had thought to board the children there during the week, ride in, to fetch them Saturdays. The idea had sat uneasy. We could wait a year, he said. Teach you here what I know. Books, too. Then see. Elias exhaled slow. I'd like that. They sat quiet a while longer. A nighthawk called wings slicing the dark. I keep waiting for something bad, Elias said suddenly. Like this is too good. Like Paul ride up one day, or the county'll come take us, or you'll change your mind. Jonah turned to him. I won't change my mind. Elias met his eyes. You sure? I'm sure. The boy looked away, throat working. Good. 'Cause Clara thinks you hung the moon. And I'm starting to believe it too. Jonah felt heat rise behind his eyes. He reached over, ruffled the boy's hair. Quick, awkward gesture. Elias did not pull away. Fall came gentle that year. No early frost to kill the late crops. They harvested what they could: potatoes stored in the root cellar, beans, dried and sacked pumpkins lined along the porch rail like orange lanterns. Jonah shot a fat doe in the aspens. They jerked most of the meat, smoked the rest. The cabin smelled of curing venison and wood smoke. One crisp morning, Jonah saddled the horse and rode to town alone. He carried a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. At the jeweler's, a narrow shop beside the bank, he laid the bundle on the counter. Inside were 2 plain gold bands worn thin from years of wear. His wife's ring and his own. He had not looked at them since the day he buried her. The jeweler, an older man with steady hands, listened without comment as Jonah explained. 2 children. A home. A promise he wanted to mark permanent, not for law, but for them. The man nodded, took measurements from a scrap of paper Jonah had marked with pencil Elias's finger, Clara's smaller one. He promised the work by week's end. When Jonah returned, he said nothing of the errand. The children did not ask. The day he rode back to fetch the rings, snow dusted the high ridges first of the season. He carried the small velvet pouch in his shirt pocket close to his heart. That evening he called them to the table after supper. Clara climbed into his lap. Elias stood beside, curious. Jonah set the pouch down, opened it slow. 2 rings glinted in the lamplight, smaller now, resized clean. 1 for each child. These were mine and hers, he said, voice rough. Thought we could make new ones out of them. Wear 'em if you want. Mean we're family, not just on paper. Clara's eyes went wide. She touched the smaller ring with one finger as if afraid it might vanish. Elias stared at the larger one, then at Jonah. You sure? The boy asked. Jonah nodded. Never been sure. He slipped the small ring onto Clara's finger. It fit perfect. She stared at it, then threw her arms around his neck, face buried in his shoulder. Jonah held her, felt her heart beat fast against his chest. Elias held out his hand. Jonah slid the ring on. The boy flexed his fingers, watched the gold catch light. Feels heavy, he said. In a good way, yeah. Jonah stood, pulled them both close, one under each arm. Clara giggled. Elias leaned in, awkward but willing. They stood like that until the fire popped low. Outside, snow fell soft and steady, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, the lamp burned warm, 3 rings catching its glow. The cabin held them close, 3 people who had walked out of separate storms and found each other on the other side. The future lay ahead, uncertain as any trail, but they would walk it together. Winter settled in earnest that year, the kind of cold that found every crack in the chinking and slipped inside like an uninvited guest. Snow piled against the cabin walls until the windows sat half blind and the wind sang low and constant through the eaves. Jonah kept the stove fed day and night. The children learned to bank the fire before sleep so the embers would hold till morning. Mornings began with the scrape of shovel on porch boards. Elias first out Clara, close behind, both bundled in coats. Jonah had patched with scraps of blanket wool. The cattle needed tending even in the deep freeze. Jonah and Elias rode out together, most days breaking ice on the creek, so the herd could drink, checking for strays caught in drifts. The boy had grown into the work. His seat on the horse was sure now, his hands steady with the rope. When they found a cow down in a coulee, legs stiff from cold, Elias dismounted without being told, knelt in the snow, and rubbed the animal's flanks until circulation returned enough for her to stand. Jonah watched from the saddle, saying nothing, but pride moved quiet behind his ribs. Clara stayed closer to the cabin those short days. She fed the chickens, now 6 hens and a scrappy rooster they had traded for in town, gathered eggs still warm from the nest boxes, and helped Jonah render tallow for candles. She learned to dip wicks slow, and even her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The cabin glowed softer at night from her work. The light caught the small gold ring on her finger and sent sparks across the walls. One evening in January, with the temperature dropped so low the axe head rang like iron on iron when Jonah split wood, they sat close around the table after supper. Clara had drawn pictures with a charred stick on brown wrapping paper, 3 figures under a big sky, a cabin, a horse, a garden gone dormant. She pushed the paper toward Jonah. That's us, she said. Last summer. See the beans climb in. Jonah studied the drawing. The lines were simple, childlike, but the feeling in them was clear warmth held against coming cold. He traced a finger over the tallest figure, This one's, silly. That's you. You're tallest. Elias leaned over. She made my hat too big. Clara giggled. It is big. Jonah smiled slow real, the kind that reached his eyes now without effort. He folded the paper careful and tucked it behind the small mirror on the wall where it stayed. That night the wind rose to a howl. The cabin creaked. Snow sifted through a pinhole in the roof and hissed on the stove. Clara woke crying from a dream she could not name. Jonah carried her to the bunk he shared with Elias, now 3 in one bed, when the cold pressed hardest bodies sharing heat. He lay between them, one arm around each. Clara pressed her face to his chest. Elias curled against his back, small snores steady after a while. Jonah lay awake, listening to their breathing. The storm raged outside indifferent, but inside the cabin held. He thought of the years he had spent alone nights when silence had felt like judgment. Now, the silence was different, filled with small sounds of life continuing. Come March, the thaw arrived sudden and fierce. Creeks swelled, the ground turned to black mud that clung to everything. Jonah and Elias worked, long hours repairing fences torn by winter drifts, mending the chicken coop where wind had pried boards loose. Clara helped where she could, carrying nails, holding wire while they stretched it taut. Her hands blistered, she never complained. One afternoon, while Jonah was in the root cellar checking potatoes for rot, Elias came running face flushed. "Rider comin'," he said, "from town." Jonah climbed out, wiped his hands on his pants. A horseman approached slow along the trail, Mr. Harlan, the mercantile clerk, coat buttoned high against the wind. He carried a small packet tied with twine. "Mail for you," Calder Harlan called when he was close. "Been holding it since the pass cleared." Jonah took the packet. Inside were 2 letters, one official-looking stamped with the county seal, the other plain envelope addressed in careful script he did not recognize. The official letter confirmed the guardianship final, no appeals pending, the judge's signature bold at the bottom. Jonah read it twice, then folded it away. The second letter was from a woman in Nebraska. She wrote that she had been their mother's cousin, heard late of the parents' deaths, searched for the children through county records. She offered a home steady work for Elias on her husband's farm school for Clara family close by. Polite. Kind. Certain. Jonah read the words slow. Elias watched his face. "What's it say?" the boy asked. Jonah handed him the letter. Elias read lips, moving silent. When he finished, he looked up, eyes steady but bright. "You gonna send us?" Jonah met his gaze. "Do you want to go?" Elias shook his head once sharp. "No. This is home." Clara appeared at the door, then wiping flour from her hands. She saw their faces came close. "What's wrong?" Jonah knelt to her level. "Someone thinks you might be happier somewhere else. With kin." Clara frowned. "But we got kin. You." Jonah felt the word land solid. He pulled them both close, Clara's arms around his neck, Elias's hand on his shoulder. The wind moved through the new grass, carrying the smell of earth waking up. That evening, Jonah wrote a short reply, thanked the woman for her concern, explained the children were settled, love staying. He sealed the envelope, rode to town the next day, and posted it himself. When he returned, the sun was low, painting the cabin gold. Clara ran to meet him, arms out. Elias waited on the porch, hands in pockets. Jonah dismounted, lifted Clara high until she laughed, then set her down. He looked at Elias. "All done," he said. Elias nodded. "Good." They ate supper on the porch that night, stew thick with potatoes and venison biscuits Clara had baked golden. Afterward, they watched the sky turn rose and violet, the first stars appearing one by one. Jonah reached into his pocket, pulled out the small drawing Clara had made months before. He had kept it folded close. "Still looks like us," he said. Clara beamed. Elias smiled, small but sure. The land stretched out before them, vast and quiet, holding its own secrets. But here on this small piece of it, 3 lives had woven